We'll again resume consideration of the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act. This is an important bill to me. I've worked on it for many years. Without a doubt, this legislation is incredibly important. Right now, in this country, there are thousands of human beings, mainly young people, living as slaves, men, women, and children, stolen from their homes, stripped of their God-given rights, and robbed of their human dignity. These individuals live among us. They live in our neighborhoods and in our suburbs, our biggest cities and our smallest towns. They live in a world of silence, fear, hopelessness, and unspeakable suffering. The State Department estimates that up to 17,500 individuals are trafficked to the United States, in the United States, every year. The majority of these are women and children. Some of them are forced into a life of unpaid servitude, many others into sex work. Worldwide, the International Labor Organization estimates that 4.5 million people are currently enslaved through sex trafficking. These numbers are staggering, but they only illustrate the scope of the problem. The suffering of each individual victim should not be lost in a sea of statistics. For victims of human trafficking, the surreal horror of their lives bears testimony to the gravity of the crime. A number of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have worked tirelessly to update our legal framework for fighting this scourge. And I want to commend them for their efforts, especially the senior senator from Texas, the senior senator from Minnesota, and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Their efforts represent exactly the sort of work that should be the mission of this body, working across the aisle to produce workable solutions to the most pressing problems facing our nation. The Majority Leader also merits praise for his decision to take up this bill and his unwavering support for it. Far too often, his predecessor focused the Senate's time and efforts on taking partisan messaging votes, abusing the rules to score political points. By prioritizing the consideration of important bipartisan legislation such as this, and by restoring this body's traditions of fulsome debate, an open amendment process, and regular order through the committee system, our new majority is putting the Senate back to work for the American people. And while the sailing has not always been totally smooth, it rarely is, the progress we have seen in restoring this institution to its proper role as a productive legislative body is both real and meaningful. Given the progress that we have made thus far, the logjam that is currently impeding our progress on this important legislation is extremely disappointing. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have claimed that we somehow supposedly snuck in a controversial abortion provision into an otherwise uncontroversial bill. Madam President, this claim is unequivocally ridiculous. First, the language in question was by no means snuck into the bill. It was in the bill when it was introduced at the beginning of this Congress. It was in the bill when those of us on the Judiciary Committee took part in an extensive markup of the bill. It was in the bill when it passed unanimously out of committee. And it was in the bill when we undertook its consideration here on the floor. In fact, there were Democrat co-sponsors of this bill. Moreover, not only was this language in the bill from the beginning, but it has also been the law of the land for nearly 4 decades. Democrats in this body have supported countless other bills with similar language, including even Obamacare. Madam President, abortion is obviously a divisive and sensitive issue. While I am strongly pro-life, I recognize that many of my friends passionately disagree with me on this issue. As members of this institution, it is incumbent upon us to respect the sincere beliefs of our colleagues with whom we disagree and to work towards responsible governing arrangements. The Hyde Amendment represents such a sensible and appropriate arrangement. It is predicated on the common sense notion that while we may vigorously disagree on whether the life should be protected before birth, we can broadly agree that taxpayer money should not be used to fund a procedure that many Americans, in fact, a majority, according to a number of polls, consider to be murder. Madam President, the responsible way for each of us to approach this bill, regardless of our view on abortion, is to embrace this long-standing common sense compromise on abortion funding and focus on passing the underlying measure, a bill that is so critical to our efforts to fight human trafficking and help alleviate the suffering of victims. To hold up the passage of this bill to pick a fight over the Hyde Amendment represents an unambiguous dereliction of senators' individual duties to responsibly legislate. Unfortunately, that is exactly what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have done. They are now threatening a filibuster unless we agree to their extreme pro-abortion position on this issue. There ought to be 6 of them who stand up and vote with us and get this bill passed. In response, the Majority Leader offered an eminently reasonable compromise, an up or down vote on an amendment to strip out the language to which they are suddenly objecting. But the Minority Leader objected, demanding a guarantee that the provision be removed. By doing so, the Minority Leader is once again resorting to outrageous my way or the highway tactics that are the antithesis of how the Senate would work or should work. It is a move out of the same playbook that he used to give us a calendar full of messaging votes last year, meant to produce political theater rather than meaningful legislation. This ploy plainly demonstrates the minority leadership's desire to muck up the majority's efforts to exercise reliable leadership, no matter the cost to the victims of human trafficking. By resorting to this sort of obstruction, they have demonstrated how desperately they want to derail our efforts to legislate responsibly and instead resort to their tired and discredited war on women rhetoric to win cheap political points. Madam President, let me repeat a point that I've repeatedly made about this impasse. Words that the Minority Leader has tried to manipulate to support his shameful gambit. For all of my colleagues who are tempted by this irresponsible strategy, it would be pathetic to hold up this bill. This bill is absolutely critical to our families and our children. I cannot believe that the Senate has become so political that my colleagues would raise this issue, this tangential, long-settled issue, at this time after the same transparently clear language passed unanimously out of the Judiciary Committee. For my colleagues to hold up this bill in an effort to seek to impose their extreme policy, to overturn the law of the land that has long enjoyed bipartisan support, to pick a false fight over abortion, or to try to embarrass the majority is itself embarrassing. I urge my colleagues in the minority in the strongest possible terms to reconsider their position and allow the Senate once again to do the people's business.